The war ended, the ashes cooled, and the world exhaled. Nazi Germany had fallen. The Allies stood victorious over a ravaged Europe. Its cities bombed out, its leadership either captured or gone. But beneath the charred remnants of the Third Reich, a quieter question lingered, one that would never make it into official victory speeches. Did we really uncover everything Germany was building? History tends to focus on what was visible: the tanks, the soldiers, the concentration camps, the rallies. But behind the veil of war, Germany was working on something else, something buried deeper than bunkers and darker than ideology. From the windswept forests of Thuringia to the icy depths of the Baltic Sea, rumors swirled of weapons too advanced for their time, blueprints for aircraft that defied physics, machines that ran without fuel, devices that manipulated fields we still don't understand. The official line is clear: the Allies dismantled the Nazi war machine and brought its scientists to justice or to American laboratories. But classified files, missing records, and whisper networks suggest another layer: a shadow legacy, one so advanced or so forbidden it may still be hidden. So we ask, what did we really defeat? Or is something still echoing beneath the ashes? When the gunfire ceased and the Nazi flags were torn down, Allied soldiers began sweeping through the remnants of the Reich. But what they found beneath the ruins was not always destruction, it was absence. Across Germany, teams stumbled upon vast underground chambers carved beneath mountains, forests, and factories. Some were empty. Others held machines no one could identify. Blueprints written in symbols that didn't match any known engineering convention. Half-finished weapons, incomplete control panels, labs so far ahead of the known technological curve, they seemed like science fiction. In one case, U.S. troops uncovered a massive subterranean complex beneath the Harz Mountains. Instead of resistance fighters or prisoners, they found cold corridors lined with rusting rails and tunnels, veering off into pitch-black silence. One officer described the scene in a declassified report. Miles of reinforced concrete, no personnel, no signs of life, but everything was wired, ready, waiting. The Soviets had similar discoveries. Deep in the forests of Poland, they found what looked like parts of a propulsion device that wasn't connected to any known aircraft. Elsewhere, Allied engineers pored over documents referencing something called Die Glocke, the bell, said to distort gravity, though no one ever found a functioning prototype. These weren't just battlefield remnants. These were signs of projects that had been hidden even from the upper echelons of the Nazi regime. Projects that pointed to a different kind of war, one fought in laboratories and cavernous test chambers, aimed not at victory but at rewriting what was technologically possible. As the Allies secured territory, the reports piled up. The Nazis had built something, or were about to. But when the Reich collapsed, those somethings were gone, moved, buried, or never finished. The war was over, but something was missing. By the time the Allies turned their attention to Nazi Germany's so-called wonder weapons, the world already knew about the terrifying power of the V1 and V2. These were Hitler's Vergeltungswaffen, weapons of retaliation designed to rain destruction on London and other Allied cities in the closing years of the war. The V1 was a pulse jet-powered flying bomb, crude but deadly, known for its eerie buzzing sound and the silence that followed just before impact. The V2, by contrast, was the first true ballistic missile. It struck without warning, traveling faster than the speed of sound. Its impact often preceded by nothing more than a momentary tremor in the ground. These were revolutionary, the V2 especially. At a time when propeller-driven aircraft still ruled the skies, Germany had launched rockets into near space and brought them crashing down with deadly precision. No warning, no defense, just sudden, violent impact. Over 3,000 V-2 rockets would eventually be launched during the war, claiming thousands of lives and flattening entire neighborhoods. But this is the story we're allowed to know. Sanitized, museum-friendly. What often gets left out is the context and the strange inconsistencies. Why did Germany divert so many resources so late in the war to technologies it knew couldn't turn the tide fast enough? Why were entire underground cities built just to assemble a weapon already in use? And more curiously, why do so many records from these programs suddenly stop long before the war ended? The V-weapons program was terrifying in its visible form, but what history often forgets is that these were only the ones they wanted us to see. Behind the hangars and launch pads, there were vaults, literal and metaphorical, sealed tight, and inside them may have been something else entirely. Something not meant for open skies, but for a different kind of battlefield. As Allied intelligence fixated on the terrifying reality of the V-1 and V-2, something stranger was happening beneath the surface, both literally and metaphorically. Buried within the same files, often shrouded in incomplete records or vague code names, were glimpses of other weapons programs that never made it to the history books. These weren't just upgrades or next iterations. They hinted at an entirely different scale of ambition. Take the V3, for example. Officially, it was a super gun, a massive cannon built into a hillside in northern France. Designed to launch explosive shells into London from over 100 miles away, it relied on a series of sequential propellant charges along its barrel to achieve unprecedented velocity. Though the V3 site was bombed before it became operational, blueprints and test materials remained, leaving investigators with a chilling realization. This wasn't just retaliation, it was obsession. Even more unnerving was Project America. Its goal? A rocket capable of reaching the United States. Documents suggest German engineers had plans for a two-stage ICBM potentially launched from modified U-boats stationed in the Atlantic. While there's no proof the project reached testing, it begs the question, were these projects simply dreams of a desperate regime? Or were they red herrings, complex distractions masking something else? Some historians believe the Nazis deliberately allowed certain weapons, like the V1 and V2, to be seen and feared while burying their real ambitions underground, literally. The repetition of resource-heavy, strategically questionable projects suggests a pattern. Show the world one thing while working in the shadows on another. And with the amount of infrastructure built, vast subterranean tunnels, entire mountain ranges hollowed out, it's hard to believe they were meant solely for weapons we've already cataloged. The deeper you go into Nazi weapons archives, the more the picture warps. What's visible appears incomplete. What's missing feels intentional. The V-weapons might have been powerful, but they may also have been smoke and mirrors. Not the end of the mystery, but the beginning of it. A breadcrumb trail left in plain sight, while something else moved beneath the surface, away from the bombings, beyond Allied reach. Long before Nazi Germany launched rockets or tested experimental aircraft, it was already on a different kind of quest, one that had less to do with science and more to do with the arcane. Within the upper ranks of the Nazi regime, particularly the SS, there existed a persistent obsession with forbidden knowledge, ancient symbols, lost civilizations, and metaphysical energies believed to be older and more powerful than modern physics. At the heart of this strange undercurrent was the Thule Society, an occult group rooted in German nationalist mysticism. Its members believed in the existence of a hidden, superior race and drew from everything from theosophy to Norse mythology to support their racial theories. Thule was more than just a spiritual movement. It laid the ideological groundwork for many of the Nazi regime's racial doctrines, and several early Nazi leaders, including Rudolf Hess and Heinrich Himmler, were influenced by its teachings. Then there was Vril, a hypothetical energy source described in a 19th century science fiction novel, but later embraced by Nazi esoteric thinkers as real. Some believed Vril was a force harnessed by an ancient subterranean race capable of powering flying machines, healing the body, or even bending reality. Whether metaphor or madness, the idea of Vril found traction within secret SS research units. Nowhere was this obsession more visible than Wewelsburg Castle, Himmler's eerie spiritual headquarters. The SS transformed the castle into a ceremonial space aligned with occult symbology. Its underground chambers rumored to host rituals meant to channel power from the past. The architecture mimicked runes. Its layout echoed ancient legends. It wasn't just a fortress, it was a temple. Why did the Nazi elite pursue such knowledge? Partly ideology, partly desperation. As the war dragged on, the line between myth and weapon blurred. They sought ancient power to build future dominance. And whether real or imagined, this obsession bled into the ambitions of their scientists, creating a strange alchemy of mysticism and machinery, of sacred geometry and atomic experimentation. A fusion that still confounds historians. Among the ruins of Nazi Germany, a few names echo louder than others, names not attached to generals or battles, but to rumors, and none is whispered more ominously than Die Glocke, the bell. Allegedly hidden within the darkest corridors of Nazi research, the bell was described in post-war testimonies and scattered documents as a metallic, bell-shaped device, large enough to fit inside a small room and sealed with thick ceramic casing. It pulsed with a violet-blue glow when active and emitted radiation so deadly that several of the scientists involved in its early phases reportedly died from exposure. But it's what the device was supposed to do that truly blurs the line between science and the impossible. Some accounts claim the bell was an attempt to tap into anti-gravity, a means to create lift without propulsion. Others suggest it manipulated time itself, warping space-time in a localized field. There are even reports of the device briefly making objects vanish and reappear mutilated. Sound familiar? That's because these are phenomena commonly tied to zero-point energy and quantum field manipulation, concepts still on the frontier of modern physics today. Though no fully authenticated schematics of Die Glocke have ever been found, fragments in classified reports and declassified Polish intelligence suggest that testing occurred at a facility known as Der Riese, or the Giant, a massive underground complex in the Owl Mountains. Why choose an isolated labyrinth of tunnels buried beneath the earth? Maybe to hide it, maybe to contain it. Die Glocke wasn't alone. Scattered references exist to teleportation experiments, invisibility trials, and electromagnetic propulsion prototypes, all seemingly decades ahead of their time. Skeptics dismiss them as myth. But if they were hoaxes, why were so many tied to real locations, real people, and real post-war disappearances? At some point during the war, Nazi science stopped following traditional physics. Or perhaps it reached the edges of what physics could tolerate, and what they found there, if even half of it is true, may explain why so many documents vanished and why some say the war ended, but the experiments did not. When Allied forces swept through Lower Silesia, in the final months of the war, they encountered an unsettling quiet beneath the wreckage. Deep in the Owl Mountains, in a labyrinth of tunnels beneath a site known as Die Riese, the Giant, they found the remains of something they couldn't quite categorize. Most of the chambers had been deliberately destroyed, sealed with concrete or filled with rubble, but one space, shaped like a silo, with reinforced walls and metal supports etched in strange patterns, was still intact. And inside, according to several accounts, they found it. A massive bell-shaped structure strapped down with heavy bolts, surrounded by scorched markings and strange stains on the floor. It didn't look like a weapon. It didn't resemble a plane, a rocket, or even a reactor. Yet its presence radiated menace. Soldiers recalled being ordered away from the site almost immediately. Engineers and intelligence officers were flown in, and soon after, the area was locked down under top security. Whatever had been found, it wasn't meant to be in a war zone or in our time. Later testimonies, particularly from Polish intelligence officer Igor Witkowski, revealed that Die Glocke, as it came to be known, was a high-priority Nazi project under the command of SS General Hans Kammler, a man who oversaw secret weapons programs and mysteriously disappeared after the war. According to leaked documents, the bell used a substance called Zerum 525, a heavy mercury-like liquid spun at high speeds inside dual counter-rotating drums. The result? Massive bursts of electromagnetic radiation and gravimetric anomalies. Trees wilted, test animals perished. Several scientists died under mysterious conditions. And the surviving researchers, they were never seen again. Even stranger, after the war, no one officially claimed ownership of the project. Not a single German scientist would admit involvement. American and Soviet records are full of redactions where Die Glocke might have appeared. It's as if the bell was a ghost, something too dangerous to bring into the light, yet too valuable to truly disappear. So the question remains, was Die Glocke abandoned or extracted? And if it was extracted, then who took it and where did it go? When Polish intelligence analyst and journalist Igor Witkowski first encountered mentions of Die Glocke in the 1990s, he wasn't searching for science fiction. He was researching Cold War-era military technology. But buried deep in Polish military archives, he stumbled upon a debriefing transcript that described something far stranger. A bell-shaped device developed by the Nazis that produced lethal radiation and strange physical effects. The scientist being interviewed, a former SS insider, spoke with visible unease. What was described wasn't just dangerous, it was incomprehensible. Witkowski went on to publish The Truth About the Wunderwaffe, where he named the machine Die Glocke and presented his findings to the world. He wasn't claiming time travel or alien propulsion. He was pointing to a serious gap in historical memory, one that governments and scientists seemed eerily reluctant to address. And that silence spoke volumes. To this day, when physicists are asked about the plausibility of what the bell was allegedly doing, generating gravitational fields, altering time perception, emitting effects that had no known analog, they often decline to comment. Some quietly admit the descriptions don't align with any known branch of physics, yet they hesitate to publicly dismiss it outright. That's what scared people most. Not that Die Glocke defied explanation, but that the science didn't even know where to start. Was it a hoax, a misinterpretation, or was it something else? An edge case of technology colliding with taboo. The modern world prides itself on skepticism and clarity, but Die Glocke exists in a place where neither seems to apply. It's not just what the machine did, it's that nobody wants to explain why it might have worked. As the Third Reich crumbled in 1945, the war's victors didn't just chase territory, they chased intellect. In the ashes of Hitler's regime, the United States and the Soviet Union began a shadow war for control over something far more valuable than weapon stockpiles, the minds behind them. This wasn't simply about capturing V-2 rocket parts or securing blueprints. Both superpowers knew the real prize lay in the brains that built those machines. Scientists who, under the Nazi regime, had operated on the cutting edge of military, aerospace, and possibly even esoteric technology. These were men who had overseen experiments in rocketry, propulsion, electromagnetic energy, and more, often under complete secrecy and with resources unimaginable in the West at the time. Enter Operation Paperclip, a covert U.S. intelligence program aimed at exfiltrating German scientists before the Soviets could reach them. Publicly, the U.S. condemned Nazi ideology. Privately, it altered the files of former SS members and war criminals to give them clean slates, enabling them to work for American institutions, especially NASA, the CIA, and the Department of Defense. One of the most famous among them was Wernher von Braun, the former SS officer who helped develop the V-2 rocket and would later lead America's Apollo program to the moon. But von Braun was just the tip of the iceberg. Dozens of lesser-known scientists were also absorbed, many of whom had worked in areas still deemed classified today. These men brought not only knowledge, but secrets, notes, formulae, and perhaps whispers of projects like Die Glocke. The U.S. wasn't just importing talent, it was importing mystery. And the Soviets were doing the same. For both nations, the question wasn't whether these scientists could build better rockets. It was whether they knew something the rest of the world didn't, something that could change the rules of science itself. For decades, Operation Paperclip was cloaked in patriotic triumph. The idea that America had outwitted the Soviets in securing Nazi scientific expertise. But behind the celebration was a carefully constructed lie. As more documents have been declassified, a darker truth has emerged. Many of the men brought into the United States weren't just scientists, they were war criminals. And the U.S. government knew it. Internal memos from the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, JIOA, revealed deliberate efforts to sanitize the backgrounds of these individuals. Files were rewritten, affiliations erased, SS ranks omitted. In some cases, entire dossiers detailing involvement in human experimentation, forced labor, or atrocities at concentration camps were simply lost. The reasoning: these scientists were considered too valuable to prosecute. Among them were figures involved not just in rocketry, but in fringe scientific projects, classified endeavors that may have brushed up against the unknown. Some had worked at underground facilities like Mittelwerk, where rockets were built using slave labor. Others were attached to weapons programs that remain only partially understood, including electromagnetic propulsion, mind control research, and biological experimentation. The uncomfortable question remains: what exactly did these scientists know that was worth burying their crimes? Were they protecting formulas, technologies, or something more abstract, like knowledge that could destabilize conventional physics or even reshape history? One 1947 intelligence memo warns that several paperclip recruits had worked on projects that were not reproducible by Allied scientists without further consultation. In other words, there were things they couldn't explain but still needed. Things that didn't quite fit into the known laws of science. The war may have ended, but the secrets didn't. They simply changed hands, and in doing so, passed quietly from one locked room to another, never entering the history books taught in school. In the aftermath of World War II, as Allied forces swept across the former Nazi strongholds, they encountered a curious pattern. Entire research facilities, vast construction zones, and secret compounds that had seemingly evaporated. Some were found abandoned mid-build. Others had been destroyed with methodical precision, and a few left no trace at all. Take Mittelwerk, for example, the underground factory carved into the Harz Mountains, where thousands of slave laborers toiled under horrific conditions to produce V-2 rockets. When the Allies discovered the site, they were struck not only by its scale, but by the technical complexity hidden beneath. But instead of preserving this crucial historical location, it was quickly stripped, sanitized, and sealed. Decades later, tourists can only visit reconstructed replicas. The original tunnels, according to officials, were too unstable to maintain, but local accounts suggest something else. Parts of Mittelwerk were intentionally collapsed with explosives, not by fleeing Nazis, but by Allied engineers. Then there's Jonastal, or the Jonas Valley, a series of subterranean complexes built under SS command and designated as a Führer headquarters near the war's end. Despite extensive excavation, the true purpose of the tunnels remains unknown. There were no obvious signs of habitation or infrastructure, just smooth, echoing corridors disappearing into the mountainside. American forces quickly occupied the region in 1945, only to hand it over to the Soviets a few months later. During that brief window, both nations reportedly conducted secret investigations. What they found, or didn't, has never been fully disclosed. Even German officials today admit that thousands of pages of wartime construction records are missing or lost in transit. This isn't just historical decay, it's surgical disappearance. In several cases, declassified aerial photos show facilities that existed in 1944 but were gone by late 1945. No ruins, no debris, just forest or farmland where concrete once stood. The question echoes like footsteps in a hollow chamber. What was removed so completely that no one wanted it to be remembered? Amid the ruins and vanished sites, something peculiar survived. Paper. Not the kind of paperwork you'd expect from a collapsing regime, but technical schematics, drawings, and mathematical notes. Many were recovered in fragments, burned edges, cryptic margins, and strange alphanumeric codes that don't align with any standard Allied engineering systems. And yet they were clearly plans for machines, components, and energy systems. The only question is, for what? Some of these documents are now housed in dusty military archives in Germany, the United States, and Russia. Others are buried deeper, referenced in intelligence memos, but classified far beyond public access. The fragments that have emerged hint at designs for objects that defy easy categorization: spinning magnetic fields, unpowered propulsion systems, geometries that resemble modern superconductors, or even ion engines decades ahead of their time. One haunting schematic recovered near the Jonastal complex showed an enormous ring of alternating current coils suspended around a central capsule. The notes were coded, but a few translated phrases stood out: stabilized field corridor, temporal containment, non-ballistic travel. Were these blueprints for advanced aircraft? energy weapons or something stranger, devices that blurred the line between propulsion and manipulation of space itself. Experts disagree, but all agree on one thing: these were not standard weapons. They belonged to a different tier of ambition, something visionary or possibly reckless. A few post-war scientists even suggested the documents might not represent completed machines, but attempts to reverse engineer something else. Whatever their true purpose, these schematics weren't meant for public eyes. They remain scattered, incomplete, and in many cases, still classified. But their ghost lingers in the files, scribbled in equations that hint at knowledge not just ahead of its time, but outside our understanding entirely. In the years immediately following World War II, something strange began to dominate headlines. Not war crimes or peace treaties, but lights in the sky. Beginning in 1947, military personnel and civilians alike reported sightings of disc-shaped objects moving with impossible speed and agility. These weren't vague whispers. Pilots, radar operators, and even base commanders gave sworn testimonies. Something was flying over restricted airspace, something no one could identify. One of the most infamous early cases occurred in June 1947, when pilot Kenneth Arnold spotted 9 crescent-shaped craft zipping near Mount Rainier in Washington state. His description, like saucers skipping on water, sparked the term flying saucer. But while the public jumped to alien theories, others in intelligence circles quietly floated a different possibility. These weren't extraterrestrial at all. They were German. Some declassified memos from U.S. Air Force intelligence during the late 1940s mentioned unusual aerial vehicles of German origin. These memos suggest that Nazi engineers had been experimenting with disc-shaped craft long before the end of the war. Names like Honebu and Vril pop up in fringe documents, alleged flying discs designed by Third Reich scientists. Most historians dismiss them as fantasy, but the designs, circular anti-gravity focused, eerily resemble what witnesses reported seeing over White Sands, Los Alamos, and Roswell. Even more curious, many of these early UFO hotspots were located directly near military installations where Operation Paperclip scientists had been relocated. Coincidence? Maybe. But it raises the unnerving question, were these sightings evidence of something inherited from the ruins of the Reich? A continuation of experiments too secret or too destabilizing to ever be fully acknowledged? The world thought the war had ended in 1945. But by 1947, the sky was whispering a different story, one of shadows that didn't disappear. They simply changed shape. In July 1947, a mysterious object fell from the sky near Roswell, New Mexico, initially reported by the U.S. military as a flying disc. The story was swiftly retracted and replaced with a narrative about a weather balloon. Decades later, the Roswell incident became ground zero for UFO lore, but one lesser-known theory lingers on the edges. What if it wasn't alien at all? What if it was the crash of a Nazi-engineered craft, repurposed by American scientists under Operation Paperclip? This theory hinges on an unsettling convergence. By 1947, dozens of former Nazi aerospace experts were quietly working at American test ranges, including White Sands and Fort Bliss, both near the Roswell crash site. Some accounts suggest experimental disc-shaped craft, designed in Germany during the war, were being tested in secret by the U.S. military. If so, the Roswell debris may not have come from another planet, but from another regime's unfinished dreams. The breadcrumbs don't end there. During the war, Allied pilots often reported encounters with glowing orbs, fast-moving lights that danced around aircraft at high speeds without causing harm. These were dubbed Foo Fighters, officially dismissed as hallucinations or misidentified enemy aircraft. They were never conclusively explained, but some now wonder if the Foo Fighters were early energy-based drone prototypes or field propulsion tests by Nazi scientists. Technology so advanced it defied known physics. Skeptics argue these claims lack hard evidence, but the timing is peculiar. The end of the Third Reich, followed by a flood of sightings, military secrecy, and redacted experiments. Whether coincidence or connection, the idea persists that the strange things seen in the sky after World War II weren't from deep space, but from deep shadows of a war that never fully ended. Throughout the decades, a handful of researchers have dared to follow the faint trail of Nazi secret weapons beyond the sanitized lines of official history. Some started with curiosity, others with a quiet obsession. But in several cases, the deeper they looked, the more the walls began to close in until they were silenced, discredited, or simply vanished from the conversation. One of the most prominent is Igor Witkowski, the Polish journalist who first publicized detailed information about Die Glocke, or the bell. His claims were based on military intelligence leaks and interviews with post-war officials, and though they were met with skepticism, they also stirred undeniable interest. Yet as soon as his book, The Truth About the Wunderwaffe, began gaining traction outside Poland, Witkowski found himself dismissed by academic circles. Accusations of sensationalism came swiftly. Conferences refused to publish his findings, but Witkowski insists that some of his sources later went silent permanently. Then there's Dr. Joseph Farrell, an independent researcher who delved into the darker corners of Nazi science, arguing that some wartime projects were too advanced to have originated solely in Germany. His investigations into Nazi technology and its strange continuance after the war were often labeled pseudoscience. But Farrell himself has noted how quickly online archives are altered and how many documents referenced in older footnotes now lead nowhere. Even mainstream historians like Nick Cook, once an aviation journalist for Jane's Defense Weekly, faced intense backlash after publishing The Hunt for Zero Point, a book exploring black-budget aerospace projects and their roots in Nazi research. Cook's deep access to the defense world was suddenly under suspicion, and he, too, was nudged to step away from unsubstantiated theories. Are these just the consequences of diving into controversial history, or something more coordinated, an effort to quietly protect a legacy that modern powers don't want examined too closely? The unanswered questions are as eerie as the history itself. Some say the past can't be hidden forever, but in the case of Nazi secret technology, the pattern tells a different story. Again and again, tantalizing fragments of evidence have surfaced, only to vanish, be discredited, or locked away behind layers of classification. It's as if someone, somewhere, is always just one step ahead of the truth. In the late 1950s, a set of blueprints reportedly showing early electromagnetic propulsion systems, allegedly recovered from a Nazi archive, circulated briefly among a group of West German engineers. These diagrams, said to mirror theoretical components from Die Glocke, were never authenticated, and before independent experts could analyze them, the documents disappeared. Their owner, a former Luftwaffe officer, later died in what officials called an accidental fire at his home. The fire consumed the originals. No copies remain. Similar stories echo throughout post-war history. In the 1970s, lab notes from an Austrian physicist, supposedly describing experiments related to vortex-based power generation, briefly appeared in academic circulation. Then the university that housed them revoked public access, citing national security interests tied to ongoing NATO review. Attempts to re-access the notes have been denied ever since. Even surviving physical devices haven't escaped the pattern. In one case, a strange metallic object unearthed near the Jonas Valley, believed by some to be a Nazi testing site, was quickly confiscated by military authorities. Amateur archaeologists who found it were given gag orders, and when pressed for details, local officials denied anything was taken at all. These aren't isolated anecdotes, they form a clear pattern. Suppression without explanation. Each time evidence leaks, it either disappears or is aggressively dismissed. Official channels point to misidentification or conspiracy thinking, but the precision of the suppression suggests something else entirely. Elite-level compartmentalization, the kind used not to hide myths, but truths deemed too destabilizing. Maybe these scattered notes and vanished blueprints weren't just curiosities from the past. Maybe they were the key to something real, something powerful, still considered too dangerous to surface. What if the war had lasted 6 more months? It's a question that haunts military historians and fuels endless speculation. By the final phase of World War II, Nazi Germany was no longer just building tanks and rockets. They were testing designs that didn't seem to belong to their time at all. Theories persist that they were close, terrifyingly close, to a breakthrough that could have changed the outcome of the war entirely. Take Project America, for instance, a missile initiative aimed at striking the U.S. East Coast from Europe. It sounds implausible until one considers the partially constructed launch sites and the mock-ups discovered after the war. Then there's the Zilbervogel, Silver Bird, a proposed suborbital spaceplane that could theoretically bomb distant targets by skipping along the upper atmosphere. Though it never left the drawing board, its design would inspire aerospace engineers decades later. But some theories stray even further from accepted history. Some suggest that the Nazis, through their occult-obsessed inner circles, may have accessed ancient knowledge or anomalous materials, elements or forces not publicly understood, a power source that defied conventional physics, a form of propulsion that seemed to bend space itself. These aren't just fringe fantasies. They're whispered about in declassified memos, buried in technical jargon and redacted reports. If even part of this is true, we must confront an unsettling possibility that the Allies didn't just stop a tyrannical regime, they narrowly averted an age of weaponized science far beyond the 20th century. What might have happened had these systems reached deployment? Would the world map look the same? Would space have become a battlefield before the moon ever became a goal? We'll never know. But the plans still linger, and so does the possibility. For decades, the question has lingered in silence, sidelined, deflected, or dismissed as too speculative to be taken seriously. But what if the knowledge behind these secret Nazi weapons didn't die with the regime? What if it didn't disappear at all? The end of World War II marked not just the collapse of the Third Reich, but the beginning of a global intelligence scramble. Operation Paperclip was just the surface. Hundreds of scientists, engineers, and occult researchers vanished into private labs, government facilities, or Soviet black sites. Their expertise, no matter how unorthodox, was deemed too valuable to lose. In the chaos of post-war politics, morality became secondary to potential. So here's the question few dare to ask. If Nazi Germany truly glimpsed a kind of science we still can't fully explain, who controls it now? Is it buried in U.S. deep state archives, hidden within classified aerospace divisions or private defense contractors? Did the Soviets develop their own version only to bury it under decades of Cold War secrecy? Or has this knowledge slipped further into the shadows, beyond governments, into the hands of elite circles with no accountability? The patterns are there. Technologies that appear suddenly without public research trails, patents that reference propulsion systems outside our current framework, and facilities rumored to be researching field manipulation under the guise of energy efficiency. And perhaps most unsettling of all, intelligence reports that hint at unacknowledged advancements that seem decades ahead of our known capabilities. If this knowledge is still alive, then history hasn't ended. It's just been hidden. The weapons were never about 1945. They were about what came after. Which begs the question, did we win the war, or just inherit its darkest secrets? And more importantly, who's building with them now? History is written by the victors, or so we're told. But what happens when the victors inherit mysteries they can't explain, when they stumble across technologies that seem untethered from their time and are forced to decide whether the world is ready for what they've found? The legacy of Nazi Germany's secret weapons program is not just in the ruins left behind, but in the questions that echo through every dark corridor and sealed archive. The underground bunkers, the anomalous blueprints, the whispered accounts of scientists who knew too much, all form a mosaic of possibilities that no official record can fully erase. We've uncovered only fragments, glimpses of projects too advanced or too strange to be explained away as wartime desperation. The bell, the coded schematics, the sites that disappeared, and the people, scientists, historians, even soldiers who walked too close to the truth and never returned with answers. Decades later, those same shadows remain. Occasionally, something surfaces, a photo, a fragment, a buried report, before vanishing again. It's as if history itself is reluctant to reveal too much, too quickly, or perhaps someone ensures that it doesn't, because some secrets don't stay buried by accident. They are buried with intent, with purpose, and every now and then they stir. A radar anomaly, a classified patent, a whisper from a retired engineer. The war may be over, but its most dangerous chapter might never have been read aloud. Maybe we've been asking the wrong question all along. Maybe the true purpose of Nazi Germany's secret weapons program wasn't to win the war, but to open a door. Not a door to conquest or territory, but to knowledge. The kind of knowledge civilizations bury because they fear what happens when it's found. We think of World War II as a clash of nations, ideologies, and armies. But beneath that visible war, there may have been another, fought in laboratories, tunnels, and the minds of men who glimpsed things they couldn't fully comprehend. Knowledge that stretched the limits of science and possibly the boundaries of reality itself. And when that war ended, the victors didn't just seize weapons, they seized the unknown. They captured blueprints written in cryptic codes, prototypes that seemed centuries ahead of their time, and scientists who spoke of energies no textbook could explain. But instead of revelation, what followed was silence. Files redacted, sites erased, names changed. A quiet understanding some things were never meant to see daylight. Perhaps the war wasn't truly about land or politics. Perhaps it was about who would control the future, who would walk away with the keys to something older, stranger, and infinitely more powerful than we can imagine. And now, almost a century later, we're left with shadows and questions. Questions that whisper not of what we defeated, but of what we may have inherited. Because sometimes the greatest mystery is the one we were never meant to solve.